All right, guys. Well, thank you all so much, man, for, like I said a minute ago, just carving out some time. I know that obviously with Zoom, people will be coming in throughout and that good stuff, but we want to be sensitive to your time tonight. If I haven't met you, my name is Stephen Perry. I get the privilege of serving as the student ministry director here at 1122. And obviously tonight we have a really awesome conversation ahead of us. Before we get to that, I want to just make a couple notes just so we're all on the same page. I think you guys get it because we're into the Zoom world a good bit of time by now, but make sure you mute yourself. We will have some time to unmute and that kind of thing later on, but mute yourself. Another one is make sure if you are looking at your screen, the top right says there's a button that says view. You'll want to, if I were you, you'll want to click the speaker view so that you're seeing the primary communicator during the conversation. And of course, the last thing is we would love for you to utilize the chat. We're going to try to utilize a poll feature tonight. So we'd love for you to be interactive in that way as well. Man, I am really, really excited about what God has in store for us tonight. You know, obviously one of the things we learned in COVID is that we can do something like this and utilize technology and make it convenient for you in your living room or at your kitchen table or wherever you may be in the car. If you are at a place where you can show your face, I would invite you to do that because it makes it a lot more personal for the call, and we can get to know each other that way if you're able to. You know, why are we doing this? There's a couple reasons, but I would like to highlight just a couple things when it comes to ministry, student ministry to parents. There's some things that we think are very important, and you've probably heard this before, but we think it's super important that you as a parent of students, whether that's middle school, high school, maybe you're here in the call and you have kids, 4th and 5th grade, or maybe you have, you know, kids and students, wherever that lands with you. We want you to feel encouraged, empowered, and equipped tonight. So when we say encourage, you're going to get to hear from a guy named Brad Griffin. He is with the Fuller Youth Institute. And I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a moment, but he is the parent of a middle school, high school, and college student. So you get to hear from someone that is in your shoes and doing what you get to do every day. Secondly, we want you to be empowered. Now, I'm really excited about this conversation tonight because we really do believe that technology can be a bridge to a greater relationship with your kids and students. And so that's some of what we're going to be discussing tonight. And lastly, we want you to be equipped. We want you to feel like as a result of tonight's conversation that maybe you have some tools in your tool belt that you didn't have before. Maybe there's some things that you can try out when it comes to this idea of technology and that kind of thing. Here's what we know. We know that in the scripture, it says this. It says, in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, it says, train up a child in the way that he or she should go. And even when they're old, they will not depart from it. So here's the thing. We know that as we approach this conversation tonight, man, our student ministry and our team, we don't take it lightly to partner with you as parents. And at the end of the day, it is an incredible privilege, an incredible responsibility, incredible mantle of leadership that God has given you to steward another life. And it started in the very beginning, right? Like it says in Proverbs 22, to train up a child. And so what we believe is that tonight, and of course, part 2 on May 10th, we'll talk more about that later, is going to further allow you to know how to best train up a child, how to best train up your middle school student or high school student or elementary student. That is our hope. That is our prayer, for tonight. And the other thing is this, the scripture says in 1 Peter that you have been given all that you need as it pertains to life and godliness. And I would say that means parenting. So God has already equipped you. He's already given you everything that you need. And at the same time, there's a great amount of tools that we can learn about and use to help us better bridge the gap, specifically for technology. So tonight, you get the privilege, and I'm about to turn it over to him. A little bit about Brad Griffin. He is the Senior Director of Content for the Fuller Youth Institute in California. This is where he develops research-based training for parents and families, for folks that work specifically with kids and students. He's a speaker, he's a writer, he's been a volunteer youth pastor. Like I said already, he's raising 3 kids, middle, high, and college. And he's written several books. And so it really is a privilege and an honor. Brad, I want to say publicly, man, thank you for pouring into us and giving your time tonight to equip those that are on the call. And I know one of you had asked about this earlier. We are recording this. And so if you know of friends and people that couldn't attend live, there will be the opportunity to go back and watch it. So before I turn it over to Brad, man, I'm going to pray for us. Let me remind you, just utilize the chat through this thing. If he says something, you've got questions, man, write it down. We'll try to get to a Q&A section at the back end of our time together. So let's pray. God, thank you so much for the opportunity we have tonight to learn from Brad and his research, and also, God, his experience as a parent. God, I pray that you'd be the center of this call, and that this would be a great opportunity for parents, God, to be encouraged tonight, to be empowered and equipped. And God, we do pray specifically for Brad that you would just give him favor over the next few minutes as we learn together. And we love you so much. Pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. So Brad, I'm going to turn it over to you, man. Thank you again for being with us.
Amen. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Stephen, for that welcome. And I'm excited to be with you all. I love talking about this. And here's the main thing I want to say up front. I love talking about this in part because I am a parent and I am wrestling with this every day like you are. And I find that sometimes parents struggle to talk about their struggles and their questions generally, but especially around technology, around digital media, social media devices. We feel this sense of shame, like maybe we're not doing the right thing, or we caved and we bought the device, or we let them get on that platform, or we let them start that account and we know they were too young, or we don't know how young is too young, or there's all these questions and we just feel like we're blowing it all the time. And I want to say up front, we're entering this conversation together as friends, as co-travelers. And I am coming to you not as someone who knows all the right answers, but who is right along with you in it, in my real life. All right. And in my professional life, I also am somebody who researches in this area and who spends a lot of time listening to leaders, to parents, and to teenagers. And so I'm bringing that to the table as well. But I hope that you can, look around this virtual room and see other people here as your allies and as people who could be conversation partners. We're not going to tonight, break out into small groups and have you talk with other people or anything, but I do want to encourage you, look around at who else is on this call. Who do you know, or who do you think, oh, I bet, I know they have kids who are the same age as my kids, or they might have, look in particular for people whose kids are a little bit older than yours, who you might be able to reach out to and learn from. So I just want to say up front, let's see each other as resources, as assets, as allies, not as competition. And let's just from the start kind of lay aside all the guilt and shame that you might have brought to this conversation about technology in your family. In particular, given the year that we have just had. And I don't know what your conversations have been like, but kind of nationally, there was all this anxiety around kids and devices and, um, you know, going into this, once we hit COVID and hit lockdowns of various kinds, one of the things that came out was, well, at least they have their devices. Well, thank goodness they can connect to each other digitally. Thank goodness they can do school remotely for however long that is. Thank goodness that they can still meet with their friends or meet with their youth group in digital spaces when they can't do it in person. And um, that's raised all kinds of really good questions for us, I think, about the role of tech in our lives. Questions that were there, but now are on a whole other level, including, as things are opening up more and more around us. Um, what does that look like going forward? What does that look like this summer? What does that look like next year? And if we've gone, maybe farther than we wanted to go with our kids and technology, is there a way to scale back? Do we get a do-over or do we get to renegotiate? Um, so we can talk about all those things. I also want to say up front, this is two-part, okay? When we set this up, we said, let's do two different sessions. We're meeting today. We're meeting on May 10th. And I'm going to mention that several times because I want you to come back for part two. And we're going to dig into a lot of practical stuff. Tonight, we are laying some groundwork together. Next time, we'll dig more into some specific questions that we don't hit tonight. And this is meant to be a two-part conversation, in part because you might have just spent all day long in meetings or on Zoom or doing the things you do during the day, right? And we don't want to overwhelm you. So we're doing two parts right now, May 10th. And with that, I want to show you, I'm going to do a little screen sharing here and we'll go back and forth a little bit. But I am a parent and my kids are all adolescents, all right? So they'll still pose for pictures like this. And I have a college student, I have a sophomore, and I have a seventh grader. And every now and then they'll get in front of the camera like this, but what they really are into is taking all kinds of pictures on their own, right? And posting on social media, being with their friends. Food is a huge part of that most of the time. There are things about this that are baffling, right? I don't understand dog ears on my head, but this is part of what is like part of their world. This is just the natural habitat that our kids and our teenagers are living in and among. But it causes us a lot of fear. So let's just kind of get up there. All right, let's get some of it out there. Why do we worry? We worry about the devices. We worry about what they're doing, what we can see and what we can't see. We worry about the influences in their lives. We worry about how much time they spend on TikTok and what is TikTok anyway, right? Or fill in the blank. We worry about influences who talk about anxiety and suicide and this is Billie Eilish and some of her music. She became a breakout music star because she shared things on the internet and she shared about pain in the lives of teenagers, and that might raise a lot of questions for us, especially pictures like this. We worry about makeup artists and those who are uh, pushing on the boundaries of what it means to be human or male or female or whatever kind of questions raise our anxiety levels. We worry about mentors who are teaching our kids about makeup and about how to present themselves in digital spaces. I'm just going to show you a small clip from this one.
Hey guys, Crispy here, and in today's video, I'm going to tell you how I take my Instagram pictures. So basically, all I use is my iPhone. So I'm going to tell you guys how I take my pictures and all the apps I use, and I'm going to tell you all my little
So, with mentors like that, what's to worry about, right? One parent we talked to said, I'd like to meet the genius who thought, let's give boys a camera they can carry around with them and then give them the ability to share photos on a whim. Talk about a colossally bad idea. Um, I think there are a lot of bad ideas we can point to out there when it comes to technology. And that tends to be where we worry, right? Where we focus, where we kind of center our anxiety. Um, and let me be, upfront. Of course, there is a lot to worry about. And our fears and anxieties, some of them are really well founded. And it is true that we're raising a generation who can find who can find a lot of answers to any question they have in a lot of digital spaces. And you and I know, because we have a little more life experience, that some of the answers that they're finding are not the best answers. And some of the places they go to find those answers are scary. And yes, there are scary people out there, and there's a whole dark undercurrent of the internet and social media. At the same time, there are incredible positive and beautiful and developmentally appropriate things about these online spaces and these devices. And our kids need us to know that they're doing the best they can with the world they've been given. And they need us to be in it with them and walking with them through it without shaming them for the only world they know. So I'm going to make a suggestion here. Sorry, now I got to get back to my screen again. There it is. I'm going to make a suggestion. Sometimes it feels like all these devices exist in between us and in between our relationships. And they can sometimes feel like a wall, right? Or a barrier in between us. But I want to suggest that we reorient and put the relationship in the center. And in our families, that our relationships are in the center, and that all those devices and platforms and whatever you put in the realm of digital media and technology, that all that serves our relationships and not the other way around. And that helps us to hold that perspective, because it can help us feel a little bit less out of control. And it can also help us right size the influence of the digital world in our lives and in our kids' lives. So I'm going to invite you a few times to chat some things in. So right now, all right, when you hear the terms social media and digital technology, terms like that, what are the first words or thoughts that come to mind? You can chat those in. What comes to mind when you think about your kids and your family? What comes to mind when you hear social media or digital technology or devices? All right, worthless. Thank you for the honesty, Lisa. Come on in. Influential. Too much TikTok and screen time, Instagram. Judgment, comparison. It's all very real. Screen time. Keep those coming in. Yeah, Snapchat. Get out of my life. Addictive. There's a lot of psychology behind this. Absolutely. It's how we do things, Mom. Yes. One parent said the first thing that came to mind for her was put that thing down. And we almost, she said that's what you should title your book, is Put That Thing Down. I want to get into some of the questions that come up for us as you continue to chat these in. This is great. I want to highlight this one too. I don't want to be the bad guy all the time. And so I want to use that to transition to this question. Why do my kids constantly check their phones? And it may or may not be a phone, it might be some other device, but why do they check, right? Why are they looking? Why are they scrolling? Why do they go back over and over again? And to get behind that, sometimes we see things, we scroll through these feeds and we're not sure what to make of it, and we're not sure why the draw. Quite honestly, many of us have that same draw, and we're not quite sure why we have that draw either. And there's a real psychology behind, the hits and the updates, and how likes and shares and feedback, it hits our brain in the same kind of ways that that drugs hit our brain, in the same kind of ways that anything that produces pleasure and excitement hits our brains. But it's doing something else for our kids too. And to frame that, I want to say, first off, welcome to the new world. We are in this world of technology that, to us, most of us as parents of teenagers and preteens, we are digital immigrants. Or if we were digital natives, we were the really early digital natives. But for our kids, this is the only world that they know. And it's an interconnected world. It's a world in which all they know are devices that um, that are touchable and responsive, and that give all kinds of immediate feedback, and that connect them with other people. So to remind ourselves of that, let's think for just a minute about communication. Okay, emoji communication. This is actually a phenomenon that's only a few years old relatively in our world. But think about how much you can communicate using symbols. You can have a whole conversation just in emojis, right? And think about how different that is to conversations that you've had in the past. Okay, how many of you have misused an emoji in a message? Absolutely. How many of you have had your kids say, Mom, that's not what you meant, right? Or please don't ever use that emoji again, right? Because it means something else. Think back for just a little bit. Now, I'm a child of the 80s, a teenager of the 90s. I remember my first Walkman. When I see an image like this, it takes me back to a middle school bus ride on the way to a skating rink, listening to Bon Jovi. All right, so I'm dating myself for you there. But think about what we expected out of that kind of technology. We expected music, entertainment, and that kind of pleasure, but we did not expect anything to give us feedback about ourselves. We didn't expect to connect with another human. We didn't expect to get constant input from that device. We just expected it to play music for us. That's a very different world from the kinds of devices that share music in our kids' ears today. Think too about online communication. All right, maybe you got your first email in high school or college or after college, depending on your age. Maybe you had an AOL account back when those were a thing. Maybe you were an instant messenger kid. You can all kind of slot in like what kind of technology was happening when you were a teenager, and what did that mean to you, and what did you expect of it? And here's the thing that can kind of help us as we get ourselves in that place, and then think about our own kids. It's important to think not just how do I get them to look up, or how do I get them to take a break from their technology, but why are they so glued to it in the first place? Why is it so motivating? What are they looking for? And for that, I want us to think about this analogy, that social media is like the new lunchroom. The new lunchroom. Now think about the lunchroom or cafeteria environment for just a minute, okay? For most of us, we can think about those times, especially in middle school and in high school, when we spent time in a lunchroom, or maybe it was a school with an outdoor lunch area, but you can get that picture in your head, right? Of a lunchroom. And the thing about that is that we were doing a lot of work there. We were doing a lot of work there. We were doing the work of identity development, of asking, who am I? Of belonging, where do I fit? Like, who do I sit with? What do I wear? How do I compare myself to other people? What's my place in this like social environment, here. And we were doing that in physical space in real time, right? So for our kids, that's what's happening in social media. Okay, for those who are on social media. And for those who are on social media and in a real lunchroom at the same time, they're doing both things at the same time. And they've got this going on multiple levels all at once. It's maybe hard for us to appreciate as parents how much a scroll on social media is a lot like looking around the lunchroom. It's a lot like looking around the lunchroom. It's comparing, it's getting feedback, it's looking at what others are doing and saying, it's looking at what they're wearing or how they fix their hair. It's figuring out what's funny and what's not. I mean, this is so much about TikTok, right? What are the latest moves and what do they mean? And what is a joke today and not very funny tomorrow? And what does it mean to be behind on that? Well, it means everything to teenagers to be up on the latest language. And that is all about our digital world for today's teenagers. They are growing up in a social economy of likes and shares and views and votes, of this kind of feedback that tells them how people are responding to them. It tells them, unfortunately, about their value and their worth, right? It's telling them things that are untrue. And this is part of our role, is helping them figure out how to navigate all of that. For kids who are gamers, who are into gaming, you might have had kids who have gotten really into Fortnite and these kinds of multiplayer games. Fortnite was a really interesting breakout because it became one of the first multiplayer mobile action games, where suddenly you had all these different environments colliding all at once. And so it's multiplayer, it's social, it's interactive, it can go anywhere that kids go. And this is where game makers live right now, in this environment of how do we get kids to stay constantly playing? How do we let them connect with each other while they play? And um, how do we create these environments where kids can express, they can create? And if any of you have had kids into Minecraft, right? They can create, they can imagine, and they can literally create whole worlds in digital spaces. So let's think for just a second about this, about that need, those needs that are being fulfilled. And for young people, a lot of the needs that they're fulfilling in these digital environments are for connection and support. These are very non-digital, non-virtual needs that are sometimes being filled in digital and virtual ways. Sometimes by necessity, sometimes by preference, sometimes because it's where everybody is, which is kind of the definition of adolescence, right? Where everybody is where I want to be. This statistic is a recent one, that 68% of teens active on social media said they've received support in tough times from other people through social media. We worry a lot about the impact on mental health. We're gonna come back to that. But I want to share some of these positives. In light of this last year, Common Sense Media put out a report and some research, and I thought this quote was really poignant. They said, "Ask what you're shutting out when you turn off your adolescent's smartphone." Now, let me say, you're going to hear, I'm all about boundaries and with technology. But I think this is a really great question for parents. Sometimes we take away the phone as punishment, and that might be appropriate. And we also need to consider that we might be shutting out that teenager's access to their social support network. And we need to think about the implications of that too. Okay? Okay, so a few ways we can take action here, and then we're going to shift to our next question. First, empathize with the need, which is social connection. think back to your own pre-adolescent and adolescent years and what was so important to you. Okay, some of us grew up in an era when we remember coming home from school after spending all day with our friends and getting on the home phone, that in some cases was like connected by a curly cord to the wall, and dragging that phone into our bedroom and talking with our friends for hours, even though we had just seen them all day at school. Why? Because teenagers are social creatures. It's how they're figuring out who they are and how they fit in the world and why they're here. And they're just trying to do those same things with the technology that's in front of them. So we can empathize with that. Second, name what's positive. Name what's positive. Maybe you have a techie kid who creates really cool things. One of my kids this past year during lots of extra time at home and on devices started making music on GarageBand. And he has come up with some really fun songs and some it's been a great place of experimentation for him and creativity for him. And I can name that as a positive thing. You might have a kid who's a great photographer and shares really fun pictures. You might see how your kid encourages other people on social media. Those are all positive things we can name. And then third, create alternatives that help keep them connected. We do need to keep our kids connected in real life with their friends. And while that has been a lot harder, and I'm not going to make a Florida joke here about Florida being open, but the world is opening back up, right? And we have more and more opportunities, and we might need to, as parents, help our kids bridge back into those in-person environments again. We might need to really encourage them by creating some of those opportunities for them to be in person with other kids their age and do some of those things that they want to do, but in person, right? So that's an important role that we play, is reminding them about that balance and how important that is. All right, I want to hit our next question here and then make sure we get to our Q&A. So let's jump back to this. Next question is, how can I help my family actually be together when we're in the same room? Okay. Have you ever texted someone else in your house to say that it's time for dinner? Okay. Have you ever sat on a couch together and been on different devices? This is a real family problem. Sometimes this is, this is very much the way we live our lives as adults as well. This is not just something we can push on our kids. So, but we want this connection, right? And we want to know, okay, how do we reclaim these spaces and times, in particular when we are in the same space? So you can chat in here. Oh, actually, this is our poll. All right. We're going to have a poll here that we're going to pop up and see if it works. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much tension does your family feel around digital media? Okay. So take a minute here to register your vote. We're going to watch it in real time. 1 is low, 5 is high. How much tension does your family feel around digital media? We'll just say these days. Would have been interesting to ask before pandemic and after. All right, so coming in. So it looks like we're clustering around the middle here, all right? So somewhere between a 3 and a 4. Okay. All right, that's pretty good. We can leave that there. Yeah, and you can chat in on this one too. Like, what causes the most tension? What are some of those things that cause tension? All right. One, because of dad. He's the one on the phone. All right. Absolutely. Sometimes we are the problem. And I want to say, when we're facing that tension, our default is to figure out a rule. Okay, let's figure out a rule, and we're going to solve this problem. And we're gonna do screen time. And those rules are important. So hear me say that. Okay, screen time is really effective. In particular, the younger the kid, the more effective screen time is. The more that those kids are just in front of ubiquitous screens, right? The screens are everywhere, and they're part of their day, and they're part of school, they're part of life. then we need more than just rules. So again, we're going to put this in the context of our relationships, not only rules, but thinking about our relationships. And in the context of our relationships, we have some other questions here. So one way that's helpful is to think about rituals and routines. Okay, rituals and routines. So we're going to ask questions about how we're using technology in our family and in our home. And this applies to adults as well as to kids. So when we think about these boundaries, rituals are questions like where do we use media together or separately throughout the house or in the car? When when do we typically use media during the day, throughout the week, and when will we not use media? Who do we use media with or without? Family, friends, teammates, right? Group chats, people at church. What are those appropriate ways to use media in those different relationships? And who do we not use media with? What are our boundaries around adults and around strangers? And then routines of work and play. What times and places are devoted to our work? For kids, that's homework, right? And how are those distinct? Again, including for adults. When are parents and adults in the household not going to work? That's been a whole lot harder in COVID. I work from home and my wife works from home, and we have been up until recently working full time from home all the time, and our kids are at school all the time at home. And so figuring out how to create routines in that environment looks a little different. And also play. We use these devices for play. So where and when does play happen? How's that different from work? Again, for parents, sometimes we can narrate this for our kids. Like when we're looking at a device, they don't know whether we are scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or playing a video game or responding to an email from work or we're arranging something for them, right? We do a lot for our kids on our devices. So sometimes we can narrate out loud what we're doing, including like, hey, I'm going to just take 10 minutes and veg on the couch and play this game. It may seem silly to say that out loud, but it can help. Or maybe you're going to use a device during the time when you usually don't. Like for our family, when we are around the table together for a meal, we don't do devices. And that includes adults. But if we pull out a device, it might be for a specific reason. Like, oh, that reminds me, I need to check on this for you, right? Or for that thing that's happening at church. When was that again? And I'm going to look it up. Or maybe I saw this really cool thing and I wanted to share this picture. Those are the reasons we might break our, rules. I will say at our dinner table too, a lot of questions come up that people want Siri to answer. Like there's questions about everything in the world that I don't have the answers to. And my kids are convinced that we could just ask Siri all those questions. And Siri might have answers. They may or may not be good answers, but there are answers. So think about those in your own life and in your own family rhythms. We're going to jump back to the slides here. Huge boundary that back to rules and rituals and routines. Think about how all of those reinforce protecting sleep. We're in a real sleep crisis in our country, and I would say, and pediatricians would say, this is actually one of the biggest problems among kids, preteens, and teenagers is not getting enough sleep. And if devices are doing anything in our lives that are disruptive, it's disrupting sleep. Okay? So I'm a huge proponent of routines around devices in bedrooms at night. So for my 12-year-old and for my 15-year-old, the devices come out of the room at night. They are charged out in the hall, right? There's a central place or somewhere where I know that those devices are out of the room because they need to sleep. And teenagers who say, but I have to use that alarm to get up in the morning. Man, we buy old-fashioned alarm clocks. I encourage you to do the same. Find an alarm clock that they can set and that can help them get up. Because study after study shows that devices in a room disrupt sleep. This is true for adults as well, all right? Even when the device is in the room and turned off, it has a negative impact on our sleep rhythms. I can't reinforce enough about how important sleep is for everything else in a teenager's life. Their bodies and their brains are doing so much hard work, and they need sleep to do that work well. All right, so here's some ways we can take action. Ask those when and where questions for your family, okay? Make that a conversation that you have together, and let your kids call you out, by the way, for some of those when and where questions. And then name a few consistent family rituals, both with and without digital media. Okay, so you might find that it's fun to play games together as a family. There might be something that, maybe it's just one parent and one of your kids that, like, that's your thing together, is playing a video game or being on a particular platform together. Of course, using digital media for connecting with family who are far away. That's a really great one. I will say too, having our kids put pictures or videos together from family trips, that's something that they do really well. It's natural to them, and it's a great way that they can contribute and even help us share about trips that we take together. And then finally, have more fun than fights. I think this is a really good goal for families where media causes a lot of tension. Okay, whether it's TikTok, whether it's, I want to get on this or that platform. Of course, we need to have hard conversations, but let's try to have more fun than fights, even making fun of ourselves as parents and the way that our kids make fun of us for using media wrong. Two reasons why this matters a lot. Okay, one is warmth. Warmth in families is a greater predictor for kids of overall flourishing, and specifically of carrying on faith from one generation to the next. Okay, families that can cultivate those warm relationships and that can keep those even as we push through conflict together, that we find ways to have fun, that we find ways to affirm and bless each other. That kind of warmth is one of the most important qualities in a family, especially in the teenage years when it can be really hard to cultivate warmth. Okay, don't get me wrong, that this is not easy, but it's really important. And the second reason that really matters is mental health. That, again, sleep is so connected to mental health, but also how we're navigating that family conflict. And I have a couple of quotes here also from research. This one from that same Common Sense Media report, looking at the early months of COVID in particular. Conflict over screens is common in families, and in many cases, this conflict is likely to be more harmful to adolescents' mental health than the screen time itself. That if we are constantly fighting with our kids about what they're doing on screens, that might actually be a bigger impediment than the screen itself. Now, I'm not talking about kids who are doing really destructive things on, through their devices. That's not what I'm talking about. But this is saying, kind of by and large, that conflict might actually be more harmful than pure screen time. And then this was a more updated note based on specifically coping with COVID, that young people are far more likely to say that using social media makes them feel better rather than worse when they're feeling down. And this is for young people who report normal to moderate levels of anxiety or depressive symptoms. The difference here is for young people who are severely depressed, that social media can go the other way. Okay, so for kids who have other warning signs or they have a history of really struggling with mental health, social media can make it worse. But for the average teenager, and even the one who struggles a little bit with depression and anxiety, social media can often make them feel better. Why? Because they're connecting. And that is meeting a really important need. And that's helpful for us to keep in mind. So again, you can chat in here, and then we're going to shift to Q&A. But what's one idea you want to try, or one conversation you want to have this week, all right, or in the next couple of weeks between now and the next time we get together on May 10th? I want you to think about that. You can chat that in. I'm also going to bring Stephen back in here and stop screen sharing for a minute. And let's take a little time for questions. You can also chat in, or you can unmute and ask a question. Or I wonder, Stephen, if a question has come to mind that you want to kick us off with too. I've been
Yeah,
kind of fire hosing here, so I'm
I like
taking a breath.
First off, thanks a lot, man. That is, those are some really great insights. I think one of the things that really makes a ton of sense and is a really good analogy is what you said about the lunchroom versus social media. And that makes a ton of sense. I do have a couple of people that have phoned in some questions. I want to ask Gwen Collins, would you mind to unmute yourself? Gwen's from our Arlington campus. Mind to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. What can I do for you?
What, I think you had a question that you wanted to ask in relation to the conversation we're having.
Yes. Just wanted to, a couple things. One, and he kind of touched on it with the sleeping, that was good, but what are some practical helps with boundaries, because the three of us, it's me and my two kids in the house, and we're often on our devices. We don't watch TV, but we'll sit in the same room with our devices, but just some practical helps or insights on boundaries for them. Mm-hmm. Like timing or.
Yeah, that's really good. And I would encourage you to have a conversation together, and to maybe say, and we do this sometimes in our family, to say, it feels like we've all been on our devices a lot lately. I wonder what are some times that we could set aside together to be off devices, or I wonder about being together and doing the same thing. So maybe that's so for example, a one family, one screen night is an idea from another family, not my own, but where they pick a night, and that's a night that they're going to just all be on the same screen together. They're going to watch a movie together, or watch a show together, or they're going to play a game together, but it's going to be something that they do together, right? Even though it involves a screen. Other families say, hey, we're going to have a couple hours where we're going to have dinner and we're going to play a game together that is just analog. It's playing cards or playing a board game, or we did this during COVID, where we said, all right, look, we're in our house so much, every Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon, we're going to pick one or the other, but we're just going to go out together, and we're going to go find somewhere and go for a hike. And that's something we're going to do for a couple hours. Everybody's going to come because we just all need to get out of the house together. And, kids might groan and complain about that, but once they get out and get moving, it's like a reset for everybody. So I think asking those questions together, or just to be honest, to say, hey, could we experiment? Listen, experiment is a really great word in your family. It's a much better word than rule. Okay. So try experiments. Say, hey, I've noticed we're all we're pulling out our phones, while we're eating, or we don't really eat together because we're all on different devices, whatever it is that's happening in your family. Again, no shame about what that might look like. But to say, like, hey, what if we just experiment? Try what's easy for you. Okay. In our house, we have a no device rule at dinner every night, but that might feel like a really big stretch from where you are now. Maybe you want to say, let's experiment. One night a week, we're going to do no screens during a meal, and we're just going to be around the table during that meal. And try that experiment and see how it goes. Okay. One other, I think this is back to the sleep piece is this is a really big one for me because the research supports it so much. Research would also say, and we're going to get into a few more details about this in part 2, but I'll give this tip now. That hour before bedtime is a really important hour. And I use science on my kids all the time. And I say, look, the science would say you need that 45 minutes to an hour for your brain to start to shift towards sleep. Otherwise, you're going to lay down and you'll probably be wide awake, or you're going to have trouble in the night. But it actually activates something different in your brain if you turn off the screen. And so in our family, we try to, for our kids, have the devices off at least 30 minutes before, and ideally an hour before they go to bed, and you're doing something else. You're reading a book, an old-fashioned book, or, like drawing or journaling on paper, or you're doing something, playing with a Rubik's Cube is fine. It, like, for tactile kids, anything that is not a screen for at least those 30 minutes before bedtime. And I call that not a rule, but I call it a boundary and a ritual, right? That just keeps us healthy. It helps us sleep because we need sleep to be good humans. Because I don't know about you, but when sleep is not happening in my household, we are not good humans to each other. And we are not good humans out there in the world to the other people who we're interacting with. And it's just a human need. And so we're taking care of our humanness. So by offloading to science, I can, like, put the blame somewhere else from just me being the bad guy. Okay? We'll say, look, the science backs this up. It's kind of like next time we'll get to the age boundary, and there's a 13 line that's really important for some things. And I can blame the people who make the media rules for that. To say, look, there are laws out there, and those laws say that to keep you safe, there are these restrictions in place that all these service providers have to live by. So you can push the blame off on, this isn't just me, the parent, being the bad mom, the bad cop dad or mom. It is, we're creating some boundaries. We're putting some rituals in place because they're good for all of us. And by the way, that screen before bedtime thing, it works a whole lot better if we're modeling it ourselves. And so sometimes I want to work, when it's quiet in my house, I've got more work to do, and my laptop comes back open, and I have to discipline myself to shut that laptop and sit on the couch and read a book by my kid during that 30 minutes before they go to bed, even if I open my laptop again after they go to bed, because it helps me model what I'm trying to get across. I'll say too, there, on the note of books, if your family is into books, and not all families are, they're just a great example because they're such an analog. But find things to do together. So this is going to sound really silly and old school, but like, one of my kids decided to pick up Harry Potter again, and, like, they had tried and they had abandoned it earlier, and so they were picking it up again, and we were like, well, let's just all read through Harry Potter again and watch the movies together. And so we're actually, like, our whole family's reading through the series again, and watching the movies together, because it's something that we can do, and it involves, like, we're not, like, reading them out loud or anything. We're just like reading the books. But even something like that can be a connection point, right? And something that we're doing together that gets us off screens together too, because I got to keep up because my family's ahead of me. I'm the one who's behind, by like 2 books at this point. And so I got to get my act in gear. And that, honestly, it means I've got to get off a screen so I can read a little bit more. We'll talk a ton more next time about just practical stuff, and also stuff that you might be scared about if you wonder if we're going to talk about some of those boundaries and structures and all of that. We'll dive into some of that next time.
Yeah, Brad, that may be, this next question might be covered more in that, but I did want to ask, I mean, I really appreciate the language you use with rituals and boundaries and those kinds of things. But, you know, technology can be a really great thing. Like you're talking about, it can be not in between the relationship, but it can enforce and cause more warmth around the relationship and the family. But what does happen, if you can speak to this really quickly, what would you say from a parent perspective is an appropriate response for when a student or a child is misusing social media? Like they're viewing inappropriate things, is that something that you can speak into? And then maybe you'll cover it more next time too. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Both. 100%. We will talk about that next time, and how, how important it is for us to be the parent in the relationship. Okay. So and maybe this is a good place to wrap up, is to say, by saying put the relationship first, and by saying look for ways to create warmth and to have more fun, that is not to say don't be a parent and just be a buddy to your kid. Okay. We very much still need to be parents. And so sometimes that means we have to do unpopular and hard things. It might actually mean that we do need to take a device away, right? It might mean we need to remove a privilege. It might mean we need to confront a behavior. But I'll say this next time, and I'm going to say it here. The biggest, and the research would support this, that the best prevention for almost all of what we're afraid of in the digital world, the best prevention is to talk about it. The best prevention is actually to have conversations about the things we're worried about, to have conversations about the things we see that concern us, and to talk with our kids when they do things that cross lines, to talk with them about that, to talk with them about if there's if we're going to put a new boundary in place, or maybe, maybe give a consequence that fits, whatever the crime at hand, that we're going to commit to talking about it. We're going to talk through it, and we're going to hold up the relationship through that, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it's hard, even though we would way rather just pretend like those things aren't happening. And believe me, right, there are times I would rather pretend like I didn't see something that my kid posted or said, or if I'm looking through their communication stream, which again, we'll talk more next time about kind of what to put in place. But absolutely, there are times that we need to confront those behaviors, and we need to draw lines. And I would say too, conversation, talk, and don't be afraid of resets. And this is something we can model in our own lives, and I know parents who've said, hey, I'm going to take a month off of social media because I think I spend way too much time looking at social media, and I'm just going to take a little break from it because I think I need it. Man, that communicates volumes to kids. One of my daughters deleted her social media for a week because an adult in her life, from church, who she respected and admired, said, I need to take a week off of social media. And that spoke to her in a way, that actually was, that's a whole other piece, is the other adults who are involved in our kids' lives and what they model. But we are such important models on all of that. So yeah, again, I could keep going for another hour here, but I think I think we should maybe hold off for next time on some of these.
No, that's great. That's great insights. Brad, would you want to take maybe a minute, just a little bit of time, and just kind of give here's what we're going to talk about next time, or just kind of set up the conversation next time, and maybe even included in that, what are some things that these parents can do, like between now and the next conversation?
Yeah, great. So let me share this slide real quick too. So there's some more resources you can find on our website, and fulleryouthinstitute.world/digital world or/technology. They both take you to the same place. And there are some free resources on there. If you scroll down, there are blog posts that speak to some of the things that we have talked about tonight. There are some resources like a download around screen time boundaries and how to have a conversation with your family. There's a free download for when kids want to request an app. I don't know about you, but I get app requests all the time, and I'm like, I don't know what this is. I've never heard of this. So here's a way to like put that work on your kid. There's some resources like that, but I would step back and try to have some of the conversations that we've talked about here first. Do some of that work for yourself to think about, okay, what can I empathize with? Especially if you've had trouble with empathy and you just judge your kids all the time. Let me tell you, our kids feel our judgment. They feel our judgment around technology, and they feel, and I am just as likely to speak in a shaming way to my kid, like, well, what have you been doing the last hour? Just looking at the screen, like that's a shaming statement, right? And let's take a little time this next week or two and reflect on what are the kinds of things we're saying when we speak to our kids about the way they're using these devices and platforms. What are our own emotional reactions? How can we empathize with our own needs, both now and when we were their age? And how did we meet some of those needs? Some of that can help us kind of generate some better conversations, and then start to have some conversations around these, what are the rituals, the routines, where are we maybe a little bit off? What could we try? Again, use the word experiment in your family. What could we experiment with? And maybe that's just, another kind of place to start over the next couple of weeks is pick one thing that you might experiment with in your family. Another experiment, by the way, is to ask your kid for insight or help. Ask them to teach you something that they know that you don't when it comes to technology or media. Maybe ask them to help you take better pictures with your phone. Ask them to help you get better at posts if you're someone who posts on social media, because they probably cringe at everything you post. Like find a way to kind of have fun and ask to make them an expert at something, because this is a world in which they are a lot more, they have a lot more expertise than we do. So those are just a few things maybe to kind of get us thinking and processing in the in-between time.
That's great, man. Super, super helpful. I would just say real quick, we want to be sensitive to everyone's time tonight. So parents, you've obviously heard from Brad tonight, and hopefully, like we talked about in the beginning, that you would be encouraged, whether it's hearing from another parent that's in it with you or seeing other parents on this call. You would be equipped with some next steps, some things you can try out, some conversation starters. I would highly encourage you to go to that webpage and check out some of the resources that are free and laid out for you, and that you would be empowered to be able to have those conversations, to feel like, you are capable of having those conversations. Because like we said in the beginning, you have been given all that you need as it pertains to life and godliness. And obviously underneath that umbrella is parenting kids, parenting students. And so I would just ask a big favor of you, those of you that are on the call, is you've heard tonight, and you also know that this is a part 2 conversation, May 10th. And if there is someone that you can extend a personal invitation to, another family, maybe they're not even connected to 1122, but they're a parent of a student or a kid, I would just encourage you to extend that, so that we can try to, empower, encourage, and equip as many parents as we can. So before we wrap up, Brad, would you mind to just pray a prayer over all these parents that are in the call tonight, and then we'll hopefully see you guys on part 2 on May 10th.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's pray. God, as we wrap up this conversation tonight, we confess that we often feel helpless and overwhelmed in parenting. We feel underwater. We feel confused and like we get so many mixed messages about what we're supposed to do, especially around technology and media. And God, I pray that you would meet us in the midst of that, wherever we are and whatever kinds of conversations are happening in our household. God, that you'd meet each one of us there. And for my friends here tonight, that you'd encourage them, that you have already given them all they need to be the parents they need to be. God, that your power is with them and in them. Remind them that they are loved and that they are good enough, that they are just the parent that their kids need. And God, I pray for those parents in particular who came to this maybe kind of hopeless or at wit's end around some of these issues. God, that there be a seed of hope and that you'd remind them that you are walking with them in this season, and that you want to walk through it with them to the other side and to a more hopeful place. God, would you encourage us, and would you strengthen our relationships in our families, even as we navigate this really tricky territory. God, that none of it is too big for you, and that you love us so much that you're not going to leave us alone in it. In Jesus' name, amen.